Hello. For my honors presentation, I chose to do a modern retelling of Ovid's myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. I chose this specific myth, this specific story, for a couple of different reasons. One of those being that I thought this story in specific was very underrepresented when it came to popular culture. I thought that stories such as Hercules and his labors, Pluto and Persephone, even a lot of the myths you see in Percy Jackson, they've all been pretty well covered. A lot of people know the basics of how the gods were formed. They know about Achilles. And this is a story that, even on my reread of Percy Jackson, I could not find an explicit reference to. So I thought it provided for a very unique opportunity to kind of delve into it, have my own creative spin on it, take some liberties, and kind of explore several different aspects. I also liked it because I thought that this story could allow me to borrow from several different genres, such as a rom-com genre and also like a gangster genre for my specific retelling, which we'll get into. But as you'll see, I did take inspiration from several different categories and kind of combine them all into one story. So starting off, we have Orson, who is taking place of Orpheus. And throughout my story, I did make a couple of changes that we will get into. But for most of the part, the characterization and the overall outline of the story has remained the same. Reading it, you can very clearly see where the inspiration, where the original hallmark comes from, but one of the major differences I made is there's no mystical element. There is no magic, there's no superstitions. It takes place in the real world. Everything that happens is something that could feasibly happen. And I really like this aspect because I thought it would be cool to see what it would be like if this actually took place. And also just removing that mystical aspect kind of forced me to make some liberties. He can't go down to the deepest part of the underworld, but he could go down to a basement. Or in my story, he actually goes to the top of a skyscraper. And again, we will get into that. But stuff like that, kind of turning things on their head, I thought provided for a couple of cool different opportunities. Eurydice is replaced by Eula, whose disappearance actually marks the major hallmark of the story, as it does in the original. And him tracking her down, Orson tracking Eula down, leads to him discovering this underworld mafia conspiracy. Again, borrowing aspects from that. The picture here kind of demonstrates the tone I was trying to achieve. And for the most part, throughout my presentation, all the pictures I've added or inserted kind of show the tone I was trying to achieve when I wrote a specific setting in my story or a specific scene, the feelings I wanted to invoke. One major change for my story is, unlike Ovid's ultimate end, where they do reunite in the afterworld, mine is not like that. My story, they ultimately end sad, as in the original when he looks back and it ends badly. Same thing here, but there's no later reunion, they make up, nothing like that. Beginning off, their love story is not one that begins immediately. As Orson is a beautiful street musician, his music is wondrous. Everybody enjoys it. He's a staple of the city. Everybody knows who he is. And Eula is just someone that walks by. She's just coming through every day listening to him. Eventually, they develop a rapport. And this rapport develops into friendship and then attraction. Eventually, they decide to go on a date. And in my story, I kind of took this as the replacement of their marriage in the original. I figured that a date in modern days for some people could be equated to as big of a deal as marriage, just agreeing to go on a simple outing. And so they're both excited by it. They're both happy to go on it. But the day of the date, there's no word from Eula. She ghosts him, to say. You can kind of see the image, how he's feeling. There's no response from her, nothing. And, most people initially would be like, all right, just wasn't meant to be. But Orson's not like that. He's like, I feel like there's something deeper going on. It seemed like she really liked me. What is happening? Like, why would she do this? Like, I just don't believe it. We then get into kind of the meat of the story. So Orson begins to investigate. He's looking out. He's like, what is happening? And here I kind of wanted to borrow elements from Sherlock, almost kind of like a Sherlock Holmes-esque story of him investigating, reaching out to different people, really interviewing people, finding where she went, and all this interviewing leads to him discovering that she was last seen hanging out with certain undesirables from I didn't get too specific in my story, but I envisioned a possible red district area. I also thought, while I did not make this choice, that instead of her being taken by people, it could be replaced with she was accidentally drugged or roofied with something called venom as an homage to the original snake that bites her. Either way, we then lead into his investigation, leading him to the household of a large Dawn, who takes the place of Hayden. You can kind of see with the images I placed here the aesthetic I wanted to imbue in the reader as I was writing my scenes. This mansion, this manor, this compound is the main place where the bulk of my story takes place. And I wanted that feeling to be felt, that it's a very dark, very gloomy, very scary place that Orson has just showed up to without really knowing what is happening. I wanted to, if I were to have like visuals for it, but unfortunately it was a written story, to have stuff reminiscent of Gothic literature, and then, as I've shown already, kind of like a mafia aesthetic vibe. Once he's there, he's taken straight to meet the Don of the place himself, who, on his initial impression, Orson perceives as being a hard-ass. He's like, this guy looks scary, he's tough, he's brutal, this is going to be a very difficult task. He explains to him why he's here. This girl he was talking to, Eula, was taken. He did his investigating and tracked him to here. And the Don doesn't care. He's like, I own this place. You're like less than insignificant to me. Like, he would kill him right there, but that would take more time than it was worth. So he just tells him to leave, like without even sparing a glance. On his way out, however, Orson begins playing music out of desperation, fear, whatever you'll have it. And hearing that music changes the heart of the Don. He's like, wait a minute, this is kind of good. And I had a couple lines where I mentioned his underlings, who were meant to take the place of Sisyphus and Tantalus in Ovid's story, how they stopped their tasks. Similarly, the Don's underlings stop carving up a person or sharpening a knife, like that, as an homage to that. So upon hearing this music, Hayden allows for an exception to be made. He says that, Orson, you can take back Eula on one condition. You can never look back at her on the whole way out. Very obvious reference to the original story. But in this, Eula is being held at the very, very top of the compound. So, again, a difference from before, where she's in the darkest level of Hades. This time she's at the top, and so he's to make his way down instead of making his way up. So, Orson takes his deal. He obviously takes the elevator with people. He's escorted all the way up, turned around, and they hand him a hand of someone who they say is Eula. They're like, this is Eula, you cannot look back, you have to trust. And he's like, okay, like, I'm happy. Like, he found this girl, even though she's not really his girl at this point, and he starts taking the stairs. The stairwell image I put here is kind of what I imagined that he would be walking down as I was writing the scenes. But starting off on his journey, he's very just relieved. He found her, he's alive, she's alive, everything's going to be good. Even if they don't go on a date, he rescued this girl he was crushing on, so all seems well. But it's a very long stairwell, and as he's going, that relief kind of turns into worry, that worry turns to anxiety, and the anxiety to eventual panic. And that panic ends up being his downfall. As he is about to come to the first floor, almost there, he turns back and looks just because he can't help it. He's like, like, she hasn't spoken the whole way down. I'm like, I just want to hear her voice, like, something. He turns back and looks, only to see a gun is being pointed at him by someone who's not Eula, still a girl, but someone he's never seen before. And as soon as he looks back, he is shot. It is game over for him. There is no more. That is the end of Orson's story. In my story, I then had a cutscene to Hayden's point of view, kind of explaining to one of his underlings why he did what he did. And Hayden's mentality in this was that Orson's music was really good, and they had already killed Eula for she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was an accident. But the fact that Orson had managed to track them down to this compound means that he was a very capable person. That combined with his ability to play music, he didn't want the death of someone like this in his place. Hayden is still an honorable man. Even though he is a mafia don, he was going to allow Orson to leave, and even with the girl, he was going to allow him to leave all the way. Unfortunately, Orson did not stick to the condition and thus met his imminent demise. So, kind of finishing up here, a lot of my story I did want to take from the original. A lot of the original themes that you see from Orpheus and Eurydice I wanted represented in my take. As I mentioned before, the mystical elements are suspended, which I think allows for a couple cool things to happen. The betrayal at the end is different from before, where it was just purely Orpheus not being able to resist temptation. With this, there's another element added to that. I also wanted, throughout my story, to kind of have it feel like different genres. So it begins off as kind of a cutesy rom-com, and then goes into a Sherlock Detective Holmes kind of aesthetic, and then ends in this like Mafia Dawn, very heavy gangster era. vibe. The change in ending where he does not reunite with her in the afterlife is another creative choice I made because one, I felt like suspension of belief to that extent, because it takes place in the modern world, would have been a little difficult. But I also just like that it was a tragic story. Like they don't end up together, they both end up dead. So you could think that they are together in the afterlife, but I just didn't choose to expand on that. And some of the major themes covered I had was the love and loss of how, he just met her, he both loved and lost both their lives in a short amount of time, and then his lack of trust in both himself for not being able to withstand looking back, but also his trust in her that she would not have just flaked on me without a further explanation. The power dynamics with Hayden and this lowly street musician were also some aspects I touched upon in my story, but I thought could have been expanded upon. My story overall was only a couple pages long, but I do believe that there is major potential here for it to be a short story, a novella even, with the content I had. Thank you very much.